What's going on, guys? Matt here from Project Unbroken, and today I want to discuss an idea that I think holds most people back from really having a successful, happy, fulfilled life in the recovery process. And this is something that I struggled with a lot, especially in the early stages of my recovery. And after I kind of figured this out for myself, everything's been way easier. It's been way easier to focus my attention and do what I need to do to live a happy and fulfilled and peaceful life in my recovery. So one of the biggest hang-ups I think people get stuck in early on in recovery, and some people maybe struggle with this for a really long time, is steps 2 and 3 of the 12-step program. Step 2 is believing that a power greater than yourself can help, and step 3 is deciding to give control over to that greater power. So for me, I was in rehab when I first was introduced to this idea, and I've explained in some of my videos before, I'm not a super religious guy. I have my beliefs, but they don't really fall in line with maybe traditional organized religious groups. And that's okay. If it does to you, that's awesome. If it doesn't, that's okay too. We can still all find our way to recovery in our own way, which is kind of what Greg and I like to talk about. But for me, the way that this was kind of presented was in a very religious fashion, and I struggled with it because I kind of had my spiritual beliefs set in place, and I was trying to hash this out in my mind, like, A, what is this greater power, and B, turning control over to that power. I'm having a tough time swallowing that pill, so to speak. So I was really trying to wrap my head around this thing, and it slowly started to come to me in a way that I was able to comprehend. And I remember I was laying on my bunk in this rehabilitation center, and I was really trying to figure it out, and I obviously couldn't sleep because I was going through withdrawal, and the gears were spinning. And so I started to think of different things that could be my higher power. And what I ended up starting this thought process with was, okay, my higher power could be my support group. I have a really great group of people, family, friends, that are all 100% behind me. They're encouraging me to get better. They want me to get better. And they, especially as a collective group, are a greater power than myself in more ways than one. So that's kind of where this thought process started. And as I started to kind of unpack that idea, my next thought was, well, how can I best serve that greater power? What can I do to honor that greater power that is going to benefit them, or it, however you want to look at it, and how's it going to benefit my recovery? And what I started to think was, well, if I could get back to the person I was before substance abuse, before heroin, before pills, before coke, before smoking weed, before drinking, like before anything came into the picture that kind of led me to where I was at that moment, laying on that bed, staring at the ceiling, withdrawing. If I could get back to that person, that would be the best way to honor those people, because that's the person they wanted back. And honestly, selfishly, that's the person I wanted back too. This was the person who didn't struggle with anxiety, didn't struggle with depression, didn't struggle with fear of everything, emotions, relationships, you name it. That person, before all the substance abuse and shit that comes along with it, was a happy, friendly, outgoing person. So that ended up kind of being my next higher power. Like, I need to get myself back to that place, and that is the end goal. When I had that solidified, the higher power, a very clear picture of the higher power and how I could best serve that higher power, that made everything much, much easier, because then it's like having a destination. If you pull a map out, if you don't know where you're going, very specifically, it's going to be really difficult to get there. And I think for me, that higher power was my destination. And I knew exactly, as soon as that clicked in my head, in that bed that night, I knew exactly what I needed to do. And for me, there was no turning back. And it was a very simple process of reverse engineering what I needed to do to get back to the person that I was. So what are those steps? Well, I knew right off the bat, can't have any drugs in your system. And by drugs, I mean, heroin, opiates, cocaine, whatever. Like I can't have that. That's what's causing my life to be completely unmanageable and not allowing me to be the person I want to be. So step one, that's done. Start looking back now at the person who I was. What was that person doing? Active in sports, active in, healthy relationships, healthy social circles, surrounding myself with good people. So all these things started to kind of fall into place, and then I knew how to organize my life in a way to get back to that person. So what has, really made a major impact is that higher power, and the decision to turn myself over to that higher power was not at all a religious thing, and more importantly, it was not at all a vague thing. It was a very specific goal. I wanted to get to who I was before drugs, and substance abuse entered into the picture. I knew how to do that, and that was a simple process. So I knew I had to start working out. I had to start improving my relationships. I had to start doing all the things that Matt before substance abuse used to do, and I had to get rid of all the things that Matt with substance abuse is doing. And it just made everything very clear and very simple. So if you're kind of stuck in this process, or maybe you're struggling with your recovery and you don't maybe have a very crystal clear picture of where you want to be in your recovery, or where you want to be as a person, I suggest maybe going back to the second and third steps. And if you haven't been there, start to conceptualize an idea of who you want to be as a person. And like, how do you want to behave? How do you want your social circle to look? Who do you want to best serve? And whether that is your idea of God or the universe or your support group or even a special person in your life that you want to turn things over to, it's not as if you're giving up your responsibility. And that's something that I struggle with. I knew that I had to do it. When it said turn yourself over to this greater power, I was thinking like, well, that's not holding myself very accountable. And when I kind of reconceptualized my idea of that greater power and how I had to turn things over to it, or turn control over to that greater power, I understood that I was responsible for making those changes and turning that control over to that greater power. This didn't shift the responsibility over to them by any means, or off of myself. If anything, it held me more accountable and more responsible for making sure I made those changes to better serve that greater power, which was being the best person I could be for the people that were in my support group and that were encouraging me to get better. So maybe you don't have that group of people or that support group that I had. Obviously, it would be different in your case. But you need to find that end goal, that thing that you are recovering for that is greater than yourself. Because a lot of times when we're going through addiction, when we're coming through our recovery, we don't always hold ourselves in the highest regards. So it's easy sometimes to let ourselves down, because through that process, we might not feel that we're worth it, or we might not hold ourselves in very high self-esteem. We're not going to be disappointed if we let ourselves down. But if you have that higher power that you're working to better, or working to serve, or honor, or whatever you want to call it, you're more likely to kind of shift the focus off of yourself, who you may not make the best decisions for at that point in time, and say, hey, I need to do this for my kids. Hey, I need to do this for my parents, or whoever is in your life that you need to make these changes for. Start to understand like you're doing this for them. They could be that greater power. And there's, again, an infinite number of ideas of what that greater power could be. You just have to kind of shift your focus in that direction and take it off of yourself a little bit. Take the focus off yourself. The responsibility, the accountability is still absolutely there, but then it makes it easier if you know who you're doing it for. And you don't want to let somebody else down. A lot of times we let ourselves down and it's like, okay, whatever, I'll survive. And you will, but you won't thrive. And that's the whole point of Project Unbroken. We want you guys to not just recover, but we want you to live really fulfilled, happy, peaceful lifestyles. And I think this is a big part of that. It's a really big part of overcoming that kind of mediocrity of recovery, which unfortunately we see a lot of people kind of stuck in. They're in this semi-comfortable place and they can't seem to get past that. They hold on to a lot of struggles. And I think a lot of it is going back to the second and third step, maybe reevaluating what that greater power is, or being way more specific with it and give yourself an actual blueprint. Give yourself a map, a roadmap of where you are and where you want to be, and you can kind of connect the two dots. It's going to be way easier to understand how to get there if you know exactly where you're going. I'm going to leave you guys with that thought. I appreciate, as always, the comments, the emails, the encouragement, the love. Greg and I are both really excited to be pumping this content back out there. So please keep it coming. Let's keep the conversation going, and I look forward to talking to you guys soon. Take care.